I want to turn your attention back to the book of Acts, chapter 27. Acts chapter 27. It's a little bit more of a lengthy reading this evening, but I'll let you find that. Acts chapter 27, verse number 9 is where we'll begin. Really, in modern times, it seems as though it's become so popular, I guess, to claim some sort of religion, maybe even Christianity, at least to say that you believe in God anyway. And so you have sports figures, you have politicians, you have various commentators, I suppose, and just people on the street that would maybe often would like to say, well, yeah, I believe in God. I'm going to go to heaven, and they feel like they're, a pretty good person overall. One that was so common quite a number of years ago now, but came out in a book then eventually. She said yes, where Cassie Bernal there at Columbine, they asked her, do you believe in God? And she paid for it with her life. But really, sometimes, even though obviously I would never want to be in that case myself, and I'm not casting anything against Cassie, but sometimes we can say that we believe in God, but we don't really act like we do. We don't live like we do. We may not just believe in God, but we may even struggle believing God. And so really, I feel like this may be important for us, especially here now as we are entering a new year. Do I believe in God, first of all? But then do I believe God? Do I really trust Him? Am I willing to put my life on the line, so to speak? You may have found Acts 27 by now, but let me just call your attention also back to Luke chapter 1 and verse 38, and then we'll go over to our other passage there for Paul in Acts 27. Luke 1, verse 38, the angel has spoken to Mary, told her that she was going to have the Messiah, and Mary said, behold the handmaid of the Lord. Be it unto me according to thy word. And the angel departed from her. That phrase there, be it unto me according to thy word, I believe we find something similar to that in our reading here in Acts 27. Let's begin with verse number 9. Now, when much time was spent, let me stop there for just a moment. Maybe I better give you a little bit of background. Paul had been taken, really sort of for his safety, had been taken by the Roman garrison there or whatever, and rescued from the mob at Jerusalem. But now, as he's appealed to Caesar, he's being taken there. Now he is under that Roman control, and he is going to be in this ship along with a number of other prisoners as well. Now, when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them and said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice, and there to winter, which is an haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and the northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. But not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind, called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and so were driven. And we, being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship, and the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. The phrase that I want to notice with you is actually, our main focus is verse 25 there. I believe God. And then notice what he said, very similar to what Mary said when he said, it shall be even as it was told me. And so very similar idea, both kind of just putting their whole confidence, their whole trust in God and what he saw as best. Now again, the Christmas story, there are many things that might seem, at least to the ordinary ears, to be almost beyond belief. How can this really be? And then, of course, Paul, to many of the others, it may have seemed impossible as well. But also as part of Mary's story, the angel said, there's nothing impossible with God. And so we see right here that God is able to rescue Paul, and not only him, but he also said that he would save those that were with him as well. Now, he may seem, in our minds, the Apostle Paul would seem to be just the ideal saint. He's the man that God could use in powerful ways. He's strong in his faith in God. He did great exploits for God. And yet sometimes maybe we failed to really recognize how bad things were. Now, Paul gives us a whole catalog of the various terrible things that happened to him. But beyond even that, sometimes we can even read over it, but it doesn't really grip us. We don't really recognize how persecuted he was. And yes, he was in tough battles throughout his life, and he had to look to the Lord for strength. And of course, again, you can read that whole catalog of different things that happened to him. But here he's in this situation. It's not really his fault. He tried to give them some good advice and all. But in spite of it all, when he seemed to be at his wit's end, and it says here that all hope was gone, or was taken away, then he had to look to the Lord for strength and help and to get him out of this storm. And again, we can kind of miss the anxiety, the stress of the situation, but it says that all hope was taken away. So that must have been very dark days. Obviously, dark in another way too, I guess, with no sun or stars appearing. And they'd gone through quite some time. I don't know if we would call that a hurricane. Maybe over there they might refer to it as a typhoon. But whatever it was, anyway, Paul had to live out his faith without always seeing how God was going to come through for him. Now, use this truth here in the last Sunday evening of 2020. I hope that's appropriate enough. Most of us know and would recognize we've been through a storm. And sometimes it might seem so bleak, and we wonder if there's any light at the end, if there's any hope to be found. Very little may seem comforting to our situation. But whatever the storm may be, and however thin hope wanes or dwindles in our lives, we need to follow Paul's example here and wait until God appears for us. Wait till God steps in and does something special in our behalf. Let me just share a few thoughts with you here this evening. Sometimes, first of all, there are cares beyond our control. Sometimes there are cares beyond our control. Now, really, we sometimes like to get in the blame game. And when things come our way, we'd say, well, it's not my fault, and I didn't ask for this, and if maybe even sometimes, see, I told you so. That might not be a very nice one, but sometimes maybe, see, I told you so, or if you had paid attention, those types of things kind of come from our lips, come from our heart sometimes maybe, and we feel like, I don't deserve this. This is not what I asked for. If you had listened. And that's kind of a little bit maybe what Paul is saying here. I don't think he had a wrong attitude about it, but he's saying, sirs, you should have listened. I tried to keep us from this terrible storm, but you wouldn't listen to me. Sometimes we do need to be careful that we don't cast blame. We have that tendency. But the reality is that sometimes we have to suffer for what somebody else does. We may not be able to really force them to heed our warning. Maybe we can't actually totally avoid the trouble, but not through our own fault. It may be just through some other situation. That seems to be the case here with Paul. He had given warning. He had tried to stop them from that journey, but they wouldn't listen. They wanted to listen. It says here to the master and owner of the ship, I believe it was. Yes, the master and owner, verse 11, of the ship, that he wanted to listen, or felt like he ought to listen to them first and foremost. Now, I know a lot of people may feel furious even, and all in a dither over even recent happenings in our society and in our country, politically or medically or whatever. There's a whole realm of things that have been going on, and some people really have gotten just furious about it. And there may be plenty of blame to go around. But in one sense, and I hope you understand what I'm saying here, but in some measure, you and I really can't resolve all that. At least not by ourselves. Sure, we can pray, we can ask God to step in, we can ask God to do His will, accomplish His purpose, and all that we've been through throughout this year. But in some ways, we can't really stop that. We can't change it. We can complain, we can be frustrated, we can hide out, become a hermit or whatever. I don't know how you may want to respond necessarily, but the point is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change the situation? The question really is whether we're going to choose to trust God. Will I let Him accomplish His purpose? Will I hold on and do the best I can until He shows up? God knows what has come our way, and He is not surprised. He knows all about it. And sometimes we face cares beyond our control, but God knows. So let's move on to the next one. Yes, there are some things like that, but there also is comfort to be found based on who's in control. There is comfort to be found based on who's in control. Obviously, Paul seemed in extreme danger. We've already touched on that a time or two already. Verse number 20 kind of brings that out, where it just didn't look like there was any hope for them. God had not forgotten him, but it sure looked like He had on the surface. If others had been asking about it, if others had said, well, now don't you serve this God, and in heaven you say He can answer prayer, why have we had to go through this storm? Who knows what all was being said on the ship. But God had not forgotten him, and yet it seemed as though He had. But when it seemed hopeless, Paul had comfort. Paul was able to, in fact, as we read it there in verse 25, that Paul also shared that comfort. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, because I believe God. Well, God knew that things looked pretty hopeless for Paul, and He stepped down to that ship to encourage him, to help to lift him up and boost him, and also give him the promise of the others that were with him in the ship. There's quite a host of them there, and God knew all about every single one of them, where they came from. There were a number of prisoners on the ship. He knew those that were falsely accused. He knew those that were really, truly desperate criminals. He knew all about that too. But He was in control in spite of the storm. Robert Louis Stevenson has told of a storm. Caught a vessel that was off of a rocky coast. I don't know, often might think of that as being pretty far up north there. Some of the New England states, they have pretty rocky shores. I don't know if it was even necessarily in the United States, but anyway, it was at a rocky coast there, and it was just threatening to shipwreck them, send it to the bottom, and really all of them to a watery grave. And so, in the midst of all of that, the terror, the panic that was going on, one man, actually contrary to orders, he wasn't supposed to be up above deck, I don't guess, but anyway, he made his way to the pilot house. He wanted to kind of see a little better what was really going on. And when he got up there, he looked at the pilot, wrestling the ship inch by inch away from the rocks along the shore there. The pilot saw the man peeking in there at him, and he smiled at him. Well, the passenger went down below deck again to join the rest of them, and he cheered the other passengers with this little statement. He said, "I have seen the face of the pilot," and he smiled. All is well. You know, that really does speak volumes, doesn't it? When we recognize that, of course, in this story, you recognize the one who's in charge of that ship. If he can smile, then surely I don't have to worry about it. But when we remember that God is the one in charge, when we know that God is the captain of our boat, when we know that he is working out his purpose in our lives, we ought to be able to find comfort and strength knowing who's in control. All is well. We may not see it. It may look like we've had the worst year of our life. We may not know what the future holds, and certainly we don't. But all is well when we know who's in control. Not everybody who assumes control of a situation, sort of takes the lead. Not all of those people are really in charge. You can sometimes find somebody who will bluff their way along, and they're like, well, just follow me. I know what I'm doing, but they don't. They don't know how to get you through. And sometimes it can be kind of frustrating when you're wanting to find comfort, you want to find strength, but then in reality, you find out the one you trusted in isn't in control anyway. They can't do anything more about it than you can. But in our case, it's different. Now, in Paul's case here, let me just back up there for a moment. It may have seemed that the centurion or the ship's captain, they're the ones in charge. But you start reading the story, and it's very clear they don't know what to do. They're throwing things overboard. They have apparently lost hope as well. They're trying various things. We read it to you there. And all these different things, they're trying somehow to solve the problem, somehow get to a place where they can find safety, but there's none to be found. They weren't in charge. But when they were at their wits' end, they had not even scratched the surface of what God could do, how he could come through for them. Their fate was in God's hand, and nobody else really was able to change the end result. But he could. And he did. He stepped in here. They had made the poor decision to sail. There was nobody else to blame. But God saw Paul right there. And I have a feeling he probably saved the rest of them because of Paul, or for kind of, as a part of Paul's benefit. Just for his sake. Maybe that God had saved the rest of them. And God brought confidence to Paul, and he also brought deliverance in the end. Our comfort really is not in, obviously not in our cares, not in trying to put blame here or there. It's just simply found in confidence in God. We find our comfort based in who's in control. One more thing that I'll just notice with you quickly here as we kind of bring it to a close, but the confidence that we find is, in one sense, we might say it's brought by what we do control. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's all found in the Master. It's all found in the God who knows all about the storm. But there is a measure of this where we find confidence, we find strength based on how we handle it. And maybe by what we do control. Now, up until verse 22, or maybe even 25, Paul's condition was pretty much out of his control. What's he going to do? He didn't want to sail. He warned them against sailing. He was trying to throw things overboard along with them. He was doing what he could, but really, it wasn't in his control. He couldn't calm the storm. He couldn't steer the ship. He couldn't salvage the cargo. So there really isn't a whole lot he can do, right? Except he can trust God. He can pray to God. He can trust him for the help. The one thing that he mentions here that he could do is he could believe God. And this caused him to tell the men to be of good cheer. He was able to be, a shining light, a beacon in the midst of all of the storm that was going on. Just a simple confidence in God. It's not some sort of mind over matter proposition. He's not just saying, well, let's just all keep our chin up and we'll do better next time or whatever. We'll get through this somehow. No. It was a confidence in God who ruled the storm. Really, there's very little about this current turmoil that we can do. Probably already have covered that at least, maybe even enough, but I'll just mention it again. There's plenty going on we can't do anything much about besides pray. But we can control our own response. We can control our own integrity. We can do what we know ought to be done. We can do our very best to please God. We can keep doing what we ought to do and then just let God handle the rest. There's some things we can do, but mostly it's taking our hands off and trusting Him. But our question tonight is, am I doing what I can? Am I believing God? Am I trusting Him in the midst of the storm? It might seem hopeless at times, but that's when God delivers again. That's when God steps in again. That's when God changes the story and gives us victory. Confidence brought by what we can control. We can't do much, but we can trust God. And so as we enter this new year, yes, we have our own set of trials, and we may not be able to solve them. We may not know what to do exactly, but let's just believe God. Let's just trust Him for the new year. Let's believe that He is still in control. He's the same yesterday and today and forever. He knew all about 2020 long before we got here, before we were ever even born. He knew about it. He's still with us, and He's more than able to calm the storm. He knows how to step in just in time. And so could I ask you, even again, this week as we enter into the new year, would you just look for the angel at your side? Would you ask God to open your eyes, kind of like Elisha? Lord, just open our eyes to see what You're doing. See how the mountains around us are just teeming with your angels to help us. I don't know what the scenario may be exactly, but I do believe God knows where we are. And I do know we can trust Him. And so like Paul here, it may not be our fault. It may not be something we even know how to resolve. But we are serving one who's in control. And it ought to bring us comfort. So God bless you this week. As we enter into the new year, let's really trust God. Let's believe Him. And let's be a spot of cheer. A bright spot for those around us. That they might see that we serve a God who is still in control. Praise His name.